World leaders gathered in Paris have been trying to reach agreement on new steps to slow the course of global warming. For people in the Boston area, the results will matter locally, whether in terms of climate change or access to jobs. That's the reason for a gathering tomorrow, a rally for jobs, justice, and climate action. Our guest is a volunteer from one of the organizing groups, the Boston node of 350 Mass. We'd like to welcome David Klafter. Thank you very much for being with us, David.
Glad to be here, Chris.
Talk about the combination of those three things that you're rallying for tomorrow.
Well, jobs, justice, climate. On the surface, you can say, well, what do they have to do with each other? But we feel very strongly that in order to really successfully address the climate issue, you have to at the same time address the issue of social justice. We call it climate justice, that as long as the countries in the global north are totally willing to put the burdens of dealing with climate change on the less developed countries, or as long as people, the elites here are willing to put the cost of the adjustments to climate change here on the backs of coal miners or power plant workers who are going to lose their job and be thrown into economic catastrophe for them, really, that we're not, unless we address that, we're not going to be able to really successfully politically get the will to address the climate issues. And for too long, large sections of the environmental movement haven't really understood the justice issues involved, that we can talk about we need to reduce emissions. At the same time, we need to talk about how we can create really many more jobs by a conversion to renewable energy. That, for instance, the solar industry in Massachusetts employs many, many times more people than are engaged in generation of electricity now. But that industry is starting to be choked off in its expansion because there are these limits, they call them net metering limits, that prevent the expansion of solar in large parts of the state. And now, we think that you can't just say, we're going to close down this power plant, close down a nuclear power plant, coal plant, and not have a plan for how you're going to deal with the workers in those plants. But the number of jobs that can be created in the renewable industry with building wind farms, installing solar panels, making buildings more efficient is really much greater than the number of people that are going to be displaced. So, and I think good chunks of the labor movement are really starting to see this connection as well. So we have an alliance between labor unions who are looking for decent jobs, with the Wage Action Coalition that's looking for $15 an hour minimum wage, with environmental groups, with church groups of all sorts who see the interconnection of these issues. So I guess I would say at the most basic level, if we're not able to create a just transition away from fossil fuels, if we're not able to create a transition that lifts up the people that are being hurt in the process, that we're politically never going to accomplish it. And that really what we need to be doing is democratizing the whole power industry. That's what renewables do in the end. They take some of the power away from the large fuel companies, the oil companies, the people that are buying politicians, and return it to local landowners, cooperatives, small, farms in the Midwest, all sorts of things like that.
Well, as you know, one of the things we're struggling with right around Boston now is that there's a push to expand pipeline capacity for natural gas, supposedly to keep down the cost of electricity. And there are some people say, well, maybe that's not true. So, I mean,
right.
How do you come down on that?
Well, Maura Healey just recently came down on the side of saying it's not necessary. And I think that's certainly something we strongly agree with. If you look at the structure of the pipeline that's being proposed, we call it Kinder Morgan, the section coming through Massachusetts, that this is going to ultimately mostly take fracked gas. We try not to call it natural because there's not much natural about gas from the fracking process. They take it from Pennsylvania and Appalachian areas, bring it up through New York State and then Massachusetts. A little bit of it will get put into the Massachusetts network, but mostly it's going to then be shipped up to the seaport in Maine or New Hampshire and turned into LNG, liquefied natural gas, and shipped to Europe. On the other hand, the ratepayers in Massachusetts are going to be stuck with about a $3 billion charge to enable this gas pipeline to be built. Now, for the $3 billion that they want for building this pipeline, and it takes a number of years to get something like this online, they could instead be ramping up production of solar, of wind, of really accelerating the process of weatherization of old buildings. And in the course of doing that, they would not only save the ratepayers money in the long run, but they would be striking a real positive blow for the climate and setting an example for the rest of the country about how we can really make effective steps to deal with this.
Well, switching to the global perspective a bit here, you've got China and India, not the poorest countries, but they need a lot of growth to lift people out of poverty, and a lot of that's going to be based on fossil fuels, and they're generating so much of these greenhouse gases. Is there really anything that we can do so that whatever we do here matters?
Well, I think China and India are different questions, but I'll try to address them both a little bit. In China right now, they're facing a lot of popular pressure to start to deal with some of the pollution issues. I mean, you've probably seen the pictures.
The picture that came out this week, yes, exactly.
Right, from Shanghai, of people who can hardly see their way around. The Chinese actually are putting a tremendous amount of money into solar. They're the leading producers of solar panels in the world. They're installing a lot of it. They also have a lot of coal plants. And one of the big breakthroughs recently was that China actually agreed to in the course of the climate negotiations, to start to restrict the growth of their emissions. So, I mean, that's a positive thing. I think that China has the resources, is developing the resources to really start to deal with this in an effective way. India, there's certainly their expansion of coal is very problematic, and I think that in the course of negotiations, they're going to have to be given some incentives to move away from some of that coal to start to really put a brake on the emissions that they're producing.
Plus, if the oceans rise, you're going to have a lot of people crossing the border from Bangladesh, probably.
With sea level rise this century, there might be 50 million people in Bangladesh displaced. The border is the place to be displaced.
Not even
is
a wall
into
could
India.
stop that.
Not even a wall, no.
David, talk a little bit more about the details on what's happening tomorrow in Boston Common.
Well, we have a New England-wide coalition of environmental groups, church groups, labor groups, social justice organizations, racial justice groups that all are uniting around the slogan Jobs, Justice, Climate, and understanding that this is in conjunction with the end of the Paris climate talks. They were supposed to end today. I believe now they're being extended.
Going into overtime.
They're in overtime, yeah. So we know that whatever they agree, it's not going to be binding, that the U.S. Congress, the Republicans in it, have already said they won't approve anything that's binding. So there's not even an attempt at a binding treaty. It's a voluntary treaty that, even if fully implemented, is going to get us only to about 3.5 degrees of warming, when the stated objective is no more than 2 and hopefully 1.5 is degrees centigrade total warming since the beginning of the industrial age. Now, that's a realistic assessment of what we need to avoid major disaster, but it's not a realistic assessment of what will happen if this treaty is implemented and nothing more. So what we need to do is make it clear, yes, we're happy for any progress you made in Paris, but now take the next step, and most of all, make sure that we don't backslide on this. And I think we all are of the perspective that if you want politicians here or anywhere else in the world to do something for you, you have to make them do it. You have to show them that people care.
All right, so if people want to show they care, they should go to Parkman Bandstand tomorrow. About what time we're talking about?
That's 1 o'clock. We'll be there 1 o'clock and have a rally, a march, some chants. I think it'll be a good showing of people from all over the region. And we're looking forward to a nice day and a spirited rally.
Thank you very much for being with us. David Klafter.
Thank you.
From 350 Mass.